go down as much as between 13 to 20%, and which doesn't come back, in the new normal. The first instinct, and when we've also been talking to a lot of our clients, the first instinct across organizations, whether it's marketers, whether it's other organizations, it's all about cost cutting, right? But how is there a science to it? Is there a method to it? So sometime back, HBR did a study. They studied about 5,000 companies through the last 3 recession periods, and discovered like 3 years before the recession period, and after the recession, right? And what they also did was they studied how they spent, where they cut costs at a more holistic level, and here we are talking beyond advertising. So what came through was that about 17% of the companies did not survive. Okay, they went bankrupt. Either they went bankrupt, or they were acquired, or they just died. Yeah, and those who survived, so the remaining 80% odd who survived, more than 50-60% of them did not return back to their pre-recession sales and profitability. And there was only a slim 10% who actually flourished after a slowdown. And here when we're talking flourish, we're talking on financial parameters, right? And those who like overshot competitors and gained more. So what did these brands do? What did these companies do which were different? So what comes through is that while brands, it is very, very easy and very, very tempting to say, hey, short term, we need to cut costs, right? We need to be profitable. We need to cut costs because there's no sales happening. There's no distribution happening. It is important to bring about operational efficiencies rather than just cutting costs. Otherwise, cutting costs at a blanket level means you're trying to do more with less money across. That is not necessarily the best way. Okay, it's better to step back and see that at every stage of operations, how one can cut costs, which is for the present. So drive efficiencies for the present. But at the same time, most brands who flourished post disruptions like this are those who chose this time also to invest for the future. And what do we mean by investing for the future? Because the new normal is not going to be anything like the old normal, right? So consumer needs are going to be different. There are different collaborations, different ecosystems, different ways of business models which emerged. So those who flourish are those who invested in the future, invested in the long term. It could be in terms of R&D, it could be in terms of product expansion, it could be in terms of market expansion, it could be in terms of marketing as well. So here it's very important to see how are we measuring marketing at a time like this, right? So this is a time where it is where we need to understand that we cannot measure marketing in the short term, right? We can't say that, hey, I'm going to invest 10 crores into advertising right now, and how much sales do I get out of it? The whole role of communication here becomes long-term brand building, and that's a great opportunity. But how brands do that obviously is different across the 3 stages which Suman spoke about. And as we move on, we'll talk a little more about it. Over to you.
So, you talked about the 3 stages, which is essentially outbreak or the here and now, what we're going through right now. You talked about the recovery phase, and you've talked about the stabilization phase. So can you elaborate a little bit about what brands should be doing in the outbreak or the here and now, as we call it?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, let's talk about the here and now stage. So the most important thing that you must keep in mind is that you've got to be very agile, because you're in the middle of that event. It is unfolding, different aspects are coming out. It is very dynamic. Brands will have to respond to that. So you've got to be very agile and yet stay relevant. So like, let's say if at this point in time, let's talk about COVID as we are seeing it, the stories. Like, let's say if the recent story is about the doubling rate going down, like the days that it is taking for the patients to double is going down. If that is a story that is that broke in the morning or yesterday, brands should attach themselves to that context rather than taking something which is like, let's say, happened 2 or 3 days ago. 2 or 3 days ago in this context is a lot of time. So that is where agility plays a big role. Another big aspect is your tonality. that I cannot stress it enough at this point in time, because Upadi also said that this is not the time to be to have a short-term view. So obviously, in terms of your messaging, you got to be a part of a larger narrative which is out of your product or the category context. You must communicate to instill confidence. You must build reassurance. You can obviously make some connections to your category or to your brand, obviously. But the larger idea should be that, you should be empathetic to those affected, who are directly in the line of some sort of fire as far as this event is concerned. Ford, just to take an example, has just announced a 90-day credit relief period for people who just bought the cars. So this is something which is very empathetic. It's an act. Again, it's not just communication. So we're talking about the larger context here. And obviously collaborations. Again, I would say that this is another big one. Collaboration can happen at two levels. One could be this whole at the level of communication, where people come together and build a piece of communication. A very good example that comes to my mind is the one about AB and the sunglasses. So many stalwarts from across the country, such big names belonging to regional cinema industries came together, and ultimately that was also related to a cause, because that was an appeal to donate money for the workers who are a part of the Bombay film industry. So, like I say, but if the consumer facing phase was the piece of communication, collaboration happened at that level. Collaboration can be also in terms of an act, like Swiggy tying up with Big Basket or Licious or Venky's to give a Bangalore context to deliver stuff. This is beyond communication, and I think that also is a very important leg. In terms of don'ts, which we must talk about at this stage, is that you cannot stay silent. You cannot be passive and say that, hey, I mean, this is not too, why should I get involved in all those kind of things? No, this is not the time to stay silent. And this is also not the time to focus on certain short-term activation, so stay away from those. And if I can, like let's say, move on to the media touch points and their relevance, because this part was communication and tonality and all those kind of things. Media is related to this. Certain touch points become very, very important at this point in time. Digital is very, very relevant, because it can scale up the stuff that you're talking about. You must stay away from building top bottom of the funnel sort of initiatives, which is again saying that stay away from pushing sales. Build some brand love, build some consideration, build some top of mind, because this is going to be relevant as we take this journey. Own media comes into play. Reinforce the brand messaging that you're going ahead with trying to build. And there are certain genres that are very, very relevant at this point in time. If you look at the digital ecosystem, OTT and gaming, because people are seeking entertainment. And if you come to TV, news, because people are hungry for news. They want to stay updated as the story is unfolding. So these kind of touch points are a bit more relevant, and brands should be taking that stance that, okay, let's build a skew towards more relevant media touchpoints.
So Sumant spoke about agility, and I can't stress on that enough. So even if we're talking about the here and now, the here and now is also not consistent. So we've been about a month into lockdown, and if we actually listen to consumer sentiments and how people are feeling and what they're doing, that's also evolved and that's also changed over the last 1 month, right? So when lockdown was announced, starting with the Janta curfew and all of that, there was fair amount of panic, there was fair amount of anxiety, there was fair amount of fear, which slowly has started coming down, stabilizing a little bit. And even if you see consumer behavior, people are moving on to the virtual worlds and finding entertainment, finding ways to live in that world and do a lot of things they do in their normal way there. So, it's like you have live concerts happening. You have a lot of brands which are making these made at home ads and so on. So there are a lot of brands who are talking about the larger themes, which are stay safe, we are with you, and so on. And so there's a possible downside to that as well, So I'd like to play a video. I'll just share my screen. Bear with the tech a little bit, please. Yeah. Can everybody see the screen?
You've got to share it to Bali.
Okay. So,
Yeah, we could not.
Yeah.
Okay, now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just play this. Okay. So while there are a lot of brands who are communicating the larger themes, stay safe, stay home, family, social distancing. One second. Sorry. Okay. How does one as a brand differentiate? Okay, so how does one not become one of so many brands who are talking the same thing, and how do we differentiate? One is it becomes important to kind of look at the next level of cultural nuances than the larger themes. And we see a few beautiful examples of that as well. Yesterday Mother Dairy released a film, right, which was about this young male adult who's living on his own and who's missing his mother's food, right? Then you have, there was one which, let's say, Himalaya Men released, right, which was about men and work. which kind of
Yeah.
shows that how men right now are doing a lot of household work rather than just work at office. So to differentiate, there are two things. It's important to catch on to the different cultural nuances, different behaviors that this is eliciting. There was a film by Licious yesterday, which spoke about how you can make different kinds of food, with what limited things you have. So, for example, Kellogg's responded and said that, okay, a lot of mothers these days are looking for a lot of recipes because the kids want to eat throughout the day and they want new things, right? So they launched a whole series of saying quick recipes. So brands which capture these nuanced emotions, that's a way to stand out. And another is obviously if we are enabling communities, brands which are enabling communities, which are doing something. CSR is a very hackneyed word, so to say. But let's say Xiaomi invested and said that we're going to give so many hazmat suits and so many masks. And so brands which are really enabling something at the ground level make a difference. Brands which capture very nuanced sentiments, and these are different. Some of these might be different culturally across countries, across communities. That's surely a way to stand out. Because it's important. See, now physical availability is a big question mark, right? Distribution systems are hit, production is hit, right? So when there is no physical availability, it's the time to build mental availability. And the best way you do it is by standing out and building brand love and brand equity in the long term.
Thank you, Bali. The second stage, which you'd spoken about earlier, was the recovery phase, right?
Yeah.
And my question is, how long is this recovery phase? Is it just when things kind of open up? Is it going to be longer than that? And of course, what should brands do in this particular stage?
Okay, so of course, what follows after the outbreak stage is, like you said, recovery. And it is a bit difficult to define it in terms of a time stage. It is more to do with the context, which itself is very dynamic, because at this point in time, if you're saying that 4th of May, I can kind of say that it has begun, but even that is not sure. So it is, rather than locating or situating it in a time-based dimension, we would say that, okay, the context is more important, however we may decode it. So, okay, so the whole thing is that if that is the stage that has kind of kicked in, what brand should be doing. So the whole thing is that, as I said, that if these phases are connected in some way or the other, your brand initiative should also be. So if you have started something in terms of initiative, if it was an act, you should continue with that. You should look at how can I evolve it. If you came up with a piece which was about collaboration in some way and you had put it out to the public to share their stories, you can get onto that. Or if you have not done that, you did not do that, you can maybe look at doing it in that stage, in this stage, so that there is a continuum, there is a journey which is happening in some way, which is strategically coherent and is evolving as well. This is still not the stage to get on to short-term initiatives. It is still long-term brand building. Another context that comes into play is that if recovery has kicked in, then we can look at the whole idea of collaboration and situating that idea, the idea of collaboration, into this new context. So if in the first phase it was about, let's say, delivering essentials to people's home because everything else is locked out. In this phase, we may look at getting into collaborations around the area of shopping or commuting, or maybe certain bit of entertainment, because if those areas are kind of opening up, we may situate the idea of collaboration into these new spheres to let's say, make use out of that context. So while communicating and doing that, one again, let's say, a big don't or a big no at this point in time is don't over entertain. This is let's say, a journey towards recovery, all right, but this is still not the time to go rah rah rah. It's still, there has to be a bit of tonality adjustment even during the stage. It should be about hope and optimism. Rah 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 stage is still some time away. Again, to bring it down to certain media context, the genres, like, let's say, news and movies, most probably will be far more relevant than others at this point in time, which is again related to the first phase that we spoke about. But yes, certain new media touchpoint, like let's say out of home, could begin to kick in. Like let's say cinema, if you want to use it as a media touch point, obviously you'll have to see, you have to frame it in terms of the social distancing parameter rules that could still be applicable. But yeah, I mean, you could look at it. You could possibly theoretically, again, depending on the circumstance and the context, look at, like, let's say, getting into a, like, let's say, a in-shop activation, a mall activation. Again, like, let's say, with a caveat, of course, but these new media touch points can open up. Digital, you should again continue building brand advocacy, try and use some influencers to evolve your brand story. So these are the new things that you can do in this phase.
So when we're talking recovery, again, it's important to remember that recovery is also staggered, right? It's not universal. It's not like one fine day we're all going to come out and dance on the streets and everything goes back to normal. So when it's staggered, like Sumant said, obviously essentials become more important. And it's important to remember that any disruption, while it causes disruption and it has a downside and there are threats, it also poses certain opportunities, right? So if one were to talk about, let's say, CPG brands, okay, so which are more in the essential space, let's say food items, let's say soaps, shampoos, and daily care items, right? Now, because physical availability is a problem, if I walk into a store and I see that, hey, the brand of soap which I use is not available, I will pick up another soap. Okay, so this is also the time when consumers are going to be trying new brands, right? Loyalty will see a little bit of a dip. And this is when the other brands can move into the trial set. And during a time like that, as a brand, do I want to be in the consumer's mind space? Yes. Yeah. But I want to be in the consumer's mind space by saying that, hey, I understand you. We as a brand resonates with you. Not in the language of saying, hey, buy me, or I am selling you, right? So more and more, the consumer needs are going to change. It's again very important to be agile and to listen to that. And like someone said that, yeah, collaborations, maybe new business models is what is important now.
So going to the third stage here, clearly the stabilization phase is going to see us all living in the new normal, as you call it. What should brands be doing in this particular phase?
So, like, let's say if we are talking about the stabilization stage now, and like you called it the new normal, yeah, that caveat, that qualification is important, that it is going to be a new normal. As I said, it is not going to be an exact mirror image. Things would have changed. Certain new behaviors would have kicked in. But yes, to define it as a stage, yes, now we're talking about, like they say, the stabilization or the new normal stage. So what can brands do in this stage? Yeah, okay, so if things have become a bit stabilized now at this point in time, relatively speaking, and keeping the context in mind, brands can now start think about creating new assets, which could be a bit more product centric at this point in time. And if there is a certain something that they want to pick from whatever they have done in the past two stages and create a new asset around it. If there is a certain something you started looking at, it's just a short time initiative and it grew, it scaled up, it got you some brand love, you can try and incorporate whatever that idea is, whatever that strand of thinking is, into your brand template. That can pay. If that has paid favorably in the last two stages, you can look at spinning it or creating it into a new asset. You can prioritize your messaging now. You can be a bit more product centric rather than, like, let's say, a bigger narrative. Brand building obviously must continue, because, as I said, it needs to be continuous. But yes, certain short-term, certain initiatives around sales and short-term initiatives can be looked at this point in time legitimately. Media, obviously, I guess, normalization would have happened in the media scene as well. You can continue with the genres that were relevant that I spoke about. But yes, if you look at the digital funnel, you can get into a bit of performance oriented or a bottom of the funnel initiatives at this point in time, because, that could be all right, okay, to speak of or to trigger off at this stage.
So if you're seeing stabilization, like we said, the new normal is going to be nothing like the old normal, right? So consumer needs are different. Yeah, and this is the time consumers are going to be seeking more value, right? Not necessarily lower prices, but more value. So to give an example, during the 2000 recession, what happened is Hyundai did this in the US, and they said that, okay, anybody who buys a car from us in the next 1 year, and then because it's recession, if you happen to lose your job, then they had very attractive buyback schemes, you know. And Hyundai was one of the few automotive players in that phase who actually grew a lot of market share by doing that, right? During the 2009 recession, right? Netflix was one of the companies who survived and did very well. They had 3 million new consumers, new signups, you know, and because before that they were in the space of on rent videotapes, and from that they just switched their whole model and their whole product, and they started your TV and video streaming services, which was more economical and than going out and renting a video, right? So it gets very, very important to understand consumer needs and again make a difference in their lives. It's okay to sell now, but one needs to make a difference, and that is not just in the not just through communication. It's through product, it's through your business model, it's through what you're offering up, you know. And typically, you know, the actual what marketing theorists typically will say, you know, long term versus short term should be at a 60 to 40, right? Your John Philip Jones model and so on. But that doesn't really apply during times like this, right? And the 60-40 gets completely skewed through the different phases. And it's important to remember that in the first two phases, it's probably 100-0, right? And then slowly it's going to come back to that. And one should remember that. And I mean, how important is messaging? How important is creative? How important is media? A lot of debates around that, you know. So creative agencies, media agencies, client, we have a lot of debate on that. But never before, I think, has messaging been more important than now. What you're saying is much more important. And in the new normal, the way you distribute that message is also going to completely change. Right. So, for instance, now people are very high on digital. They are high maybe on gaming. They're high on some on OTTs. Right. It remains to be seen whether after this it's going to go back to what it was earlier, or that'll also be at a new normal. Right. So the whole role of integrated media becomes very important. The role your media planner plays in your life becomes very, very important. You know? So that's how I think it's going to be in the stabilization phase, and let's hope that phase comes quickly.
Thank you, Pali. It's once. That was brilliant, brilliant, brilliant session. Before we leave, I just wanted to kind of, you know, hear some last kind of parting thoughts. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, okay. If you ask me, I guess, you know, because of this event and the sheer magnitude of it, how scaled up it has been, I'm very sure that this is going to trigger some long-lasting behavioral changes, you know, and I think those are the ones which should be outside the framing of, like, let's say, a buying, selling, or like, let's say, a choosing a product sort of a context. This will be human. And certain changes in human behavior is something that the best of marketers, communication, advertising, media people must latch on to. So I'm sure that, you know, there will be changes that we see, and the best of us would latch on to those and you know, create narratives around them. So that is something that excites me.
And Pali?
I cannot stress enough, especially to all the marketers out there and all the leaders of the organizations out there, that do not cost cut indiscriminately and across the board. While it is important to drive operational efficiencies in the short term, that's extremely important. It is also important to invest for the future if we as brands want to come out strong on the other side.
Copy. So you've got a couple of questions which are coming in. I'm going to kind of start it with one question which I had, and then we'll kind of take questions from the audience. So my question would be, what's the relative importance of paid, owned, and earned in each one of these three stages?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we did speak of media choices and touch points during all the three. So obviously there will be an interplay, like you yourself mentioned, that the stacking up is important. So I would say that the first two stages, where you're talking a bit more agility, very here and now, and as the context unfolds, there's a certain bit of dynamism that is needed. So I guess own handles or own assets, own media platforms will play a larger role, because they are more suited to this sort of a context. And like, let's say at this point in time, the initiatives, if they are relevant enough, if they are latching on to certain human stories and phenomena, it can obviously get you more earned during this period at this point in time. And we are also seeing that, stuff which is very brand related, if it is about a macro story, if it is plugging into the right human emotion rather than a product context, it is getting play in earned media. Paid will kick in more, or will be a bit more important in the last phase, which is, like, let's say, what we're calling the stabilization, because you are starting onto that journey of product related stuff and certain bottom of the funnel initiatives. So I think that will be the interplay in my head.
Got it. Okay. There's one question which has come up from the audience. We are an advertising agency only focused on the execution of offline and BTL execution. So what is the future of these ad agencies after lockdown?
So, like, let's say, so if you're into BTL, and like it is mentioned that the execution stage and all that, I would say that, look, just because you have been playing in that area cannot come to mean that you frame yourself just like that. Collaboration, certain ideas around collaborative execution can be very, very relevant, because collaboration is something that we spoke about. You see it happening, and I think this is going to be very, very relevant, because collaborations scale up stuff. And at this point in time, we are talking about that aggregated effect. At this point in time, in first stage, we're talking about the aggregated effect of positive messaging. But theoretically, conceptually, that idea stays relevant and is useful in any stage. So if you're into that part of the value chain, you can bring in execution-led collaborations, and I think that will be kind of relevant. And I would say that you can play a part in the upper part of the value chain as well. And again, if you can collaborate with some other agencies or players, bring some value, which is thinking plus execution, that could be good. And that's something that brands would be looking for.
Thank you. There was one more question, which was, at the end of the day, it all boils down to media budgets. When there's so much of uncertainty, how would clients apportion budgets according to 3 phases?
Okay, so I think I can see another question also, which is about, which says that should not cut spends, right? And so should I not stock up my spends for the future when the stabilization phase comes in? I mean, a related question. Yes, definitely, it's not to say you should not cut spends. One necessarily has to cut spends, but the idea is do it wisely. The recommendation is to say don't go dark. Don't go completely off. So obviously for a brand which was, let's say, spending 10 crores a month, and just a number, cannot afford to spend 10 crores a month, right? So it's important. So therefore the messaging becomes more important. And even if you spend 1/10 of that, do not go dark, right? The recommendation is not to say spend at the same level. Spends need to be cut. They need to be definitely cut. And also when it's about the 3 phases, right? There is a difference in the media touch points across the 3 phases as well. And that links back to a cost of media. Okay, so like Sumant mentioned, in the first 2 phases where your owned media and your earned media is more important, messaging becomes more important, right? So, and then therefore the budget you need for that is, obviously there is nothing much called organic anymore. You still need to kind of spend behind that. But the budget needed for that is going to be significantly lesser than, let's say, you run a pan-India full-fledged TV campaign, for instance, right? So yeah, it should scale up as things open up. But the idea is to say, don't go down, still be in the consumer's mind at this time.
There's one more interesting question here, which is about, do you see the role of agencies change post-cover? Would client expectations change, and what would be some rules of the game?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's changing already. Not even post this, even as we speak, it's changing. I think our colleagues and the creative agencies would say, I don't think there are many creative agencies who've shot ads at home, right? Until they've done right now.
Yep.
And even as a media agency, our clients are asking us exactly the same questions. You know, how do I plan my budgets, right? What kind of A2S should I operate at these three changes, at these three stages, right? So it's going to become more and more important for agency to adopt a more consultative role, to become, it's an opportunity for agencies to become partners to their clients and work the journey together. And it's not just making an ad or making a media plan anymore. The role changes, and I think agencies need to upskill. Agencies need to widen their skill sets and partner with clients on things just beyond what they've been used to doing.
Thank you. There is one which is about, it's a related question. You should not cut spends, but should I stock up my spends for the future when stabilization, the phase rose again? If I continue to spend in the outbreak phase at the same level as planned before outbreak, then is it not money wasted?
Correct. So that's the question I was talking about. And they said it's a related question. So the response remains the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There is Rohit Jain, head of marketing for a jewelry brand. And I want to understand that we should go ahead to make a new communication for the TG. And also, should we go for celebrity endorsement as the brand is very old? So diamond jewelry, of course, will be the least thing in the overall pyramid of the TG.
So, okay, I would take that. So it depends on the context. Okay, at this point in time, everything comes from, you know, whatever your thinking has been. The choice of taking a celebrity or not at this point in time is something that is a bit fluid. But yes, a category like that being big ticket, well, it may take some time for people to, you know, get into spending, which is in that area. So, you know, I would rather say that, wait and watch and then mount your activity accordingly.
However, this might be a time to build the brand, right? So like the example that Sumant earlier spoke about Amitabh Bachchan and that whole film, that was actually done by another jewelry brand, right? Which is Kalyan Jewellers. But you know what past recessions typically say is that after in the stabilization phase, luxury as a segment does not suffer as much. You know, so the top whatever the top 10% who are spending on luxury after stabilization will go back to spending as much. So luxury is one of the categories which doesn't suffer. It might in the interim, maybe in the next 3 to 5 months, but once we're out of it, it's likely to go back to where it was.
This is quite an interesting question also. Is measurement becoming more and more important, or has it already become? How easy is it for startups to measure effectiveness of their spends? Any tips for startups and small agencies?
Measurement becomes all the more important, and when we spoke about saying that brands should invest for the future, I think one of the areas brands should invest is more ROI driven marketing, right? More measurement, so that even going forward, it's not like this. I mean, every paisa you spend is going to be under pressure. So measurements become more and more important. So for startups, any tips is, you know, it's very important, and we face this a lot in the whole, in many businesses which we handle, you know. I think the biggest problem happens is when we don't define what we are measuring. It's very important to define that and find ways to measure that. Okay, so right now, if we are saying in this phase, we are talking brand health, we are talking brand love, we are talking brand equity, and you're spending, let's say, X amount of money on that. You cannot measure that by sales. You cannot measure that by
Yeah.
how much am I selling on e-commerce or how much am I selling somewhere else. So setting that up and setting that expectation up with stakeholders is very, very important.
Got it. Many brands, many companies, and this is an interesting question too, many companies are changing their product portfolios to serve need gaps like sanitizers, ventilators, etc. Should this continue or stop post the stabilization phase?
Okay, I would say that because, yeah, I mean, at this point in time, you can understand the context, and this is a very, very good response. But like let's say, bringing that in as a part of this scenario unfolding is one thing. Than like let's say continuing with it as a part of your business. So I guess it'll have to make sense because like let's say I read this somewhere in the context of Swiggy as well, because the guy said that like let's say doing this to collaborate at this point in time is something that we are doing out of necessity, or to scale up the collaboration, or to bring solace to our consumers. But whether this actually develops into a line of business for us is something that we can judge only later, because business parameters will also come into play. So that you can continue with it, but ultimately it's a business call which brands can take only things have stabilized.
There was one more question here, which is about influencers. Is it good to use influencers during these times? What are the pros and cons of using influencers? And do you see influencer strategy change in the new world order?
Yes, theoretically, because I guess the larger question is, like Upali emphasized, is about brand building. Okay, so if you choose to go with influencers, but are very, very sharp about the communication and therefore choose your influencers accordingly, I think that's a legitimate and valid way to go after. Ultimately, at this point in time, influencer obviously is one dimension, but in this context, the larger or more important dimension or parameter is the messaging. What is it that you want your influencers to say? So if you chose them in, like, let's say, the pre-COVID context from a product lensing, does it still hold? What is it that you want them to say at this point in time? So I think that lensing also comes into play. And if these two are taken care of, why not?
For example, Lakme is running an influencer campaign right now as we speak. And what they're talking about is, here you're home, you're no longer dressing up. But yeah, okay, maybe do some DIY things, maybe do something which makes you feel good. So there are brands which are using influencers.
I think there's an interesting example, if I'm not mistaken, of P&G and in the city of New Jersey, I think, in the state of New Jersey, which did hashtag distance dancing as well in order to get people to be back at home. So you can use, and this was done on TikTok. So I think this is, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very, very contextual in this case. So being an advertising agency, what industries should we try pitching to? What, according to you, are the industries that will need the most digital presence or branding?
I think as agencies, we should first consolidate our existing clients because this is the time where they need us as partners more than any other time. What industries need more digital presence? So now since the consumer media consumption behavior is changing so much, right? Digital is obviously no longer a new medium. And even during this time, since digital consumption has gone up, and whether across pop strata, across audience segment, I think digital is relevant for any industry. It's not to say that only certain industries need a focus on digital, which brings me back to my point of the whole need of being integrated media planners and media strategists or communication planners is going to become more important.
Thank you. I think, guys, we are running out of time right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick check and see whether there is any, we can take one last question here. There was one which again talks about, you said brands should stay relevant, but maybe this is not possible for all brands in stage 1 and stage 2 because survival itself is doubtful.
Yeah. I mean, that is a different and a very real territory altogether. But I would say that, like, let's say if you are talking free of that context that, okay, I have the money, but how do I stay relevant? Because I'm not in a space or in a category which is like, let's say, about essential items or something like that. People are not seeking me. So what do I do? Let's say if I'm a brand in tourism, or travel bags, you can find messaging which is relevant in these times. I saw something from Discovery Channel. It came out with a communication which says that, hey, I mean, outdoors can wait. If Discovery was about new places, going here and there, the communication piece is that, hey, we understand that we're about outdoors and you want to go and travel and experience new cultures at this point in time. That can wait. Stay at home at this point in time, fulfill that need or that desire of yours at a later stage, because that day is coming. That day will come. So let's say hopeful, let's say upbeat, but at this point in time today, let's say at home. So it has spun the context on its head, maybe, but it is still relevant. It is not outside of the conversation in which we see in the ecosystem. So if you have the money, if you don't have the money, then it's a different context altogether. But otherwise, you can look at ways to stay relevant, even if you are not seemingly a part of the categories that are being spoken about in this time.
Also for brands there are many brands which are struggling to survive right now, right? And so for brands like that, the digital ecosystem becomes all the more important, right? No matter what, you will always have your own assets. And one can use that to drive relevance or to drive some kind of messaging which will resonate without really spending too much. So for instance, I think Smirnoff came up with this working at home apps, which were nothing, but they were just memes and they were just images and things like that. So there are also cost-effective ways of leveraging your own assets to be able to do that for brands who cannot afford to spend anything.
Thank you. I think, that's all we have time for. We have 3 minutes to go to end the session. Sumant and Upali, thank you so much. I think this was incredibly eye-opening and educative. There are lots of other questions which are there, which we'll probably kind of come back to each of you on. We'll probably do, we'll look through the questions and make sure that we give you the answer. We'll get Sumant and Upali to kind of give you a response for those.
Sure.
Thank you all. I just wanted to say, that's it. Thank you all for being there.
Thank you for having us, Radhika, and everybody in the Bangalore Art Club. It was a pleasure being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, guys. I must thank Radhika for starting this whole thing on part of our managing committee. And I must thank Suman and Upali for having spent some time, worked on this, and I think overall it's been a good session. And some of your ideas, some of your thoughts on how brands can stay relevant has has been really meaningful. And on behalf of the Advertising Club, I would like to thank all of you who have also taken part in this, registered. We had wonderful number of registrations, but I think only about 50% of them finally tuned in. It doesn't matter because quite a few also have tuned in onto the Facebook Live and are seeing it there, and we are live streaming this on the Facebook. And the video will stay on the Facebook. So a lot of them will also come and see it later on the Facebook. I also must inform all of you that we have these sessions continuing. We have another session planned for next Wednesday, the 29th of April, where we are tying up with IAA, the Indian International Advertising Agencies Association, and we are doing a webinar on the campaign which I recently ran against domestic violence and elder care. The two campaigns which ran after the lockdown happened, because there has been a sudden spurt in domestic violence, and I'm told that across India about 92,000 calls were received by the helplines on domestic violence, which is a humongous thing that happened, and which is not good. Uh, Considering that families are actually locked down at home, they have nothing to do, and then if and women are not getting house help, they have to do everything themselves, and over and above that, if they also have to face domestic violence, I think it's the worst thing that can happen to any family. So we are doing this. In fact, Meghna Tata of Discovery has agreed to moderate the session, and we are currently in the process of finalizing the speakers. So we'll be announcing that probably in a day or two. Okay, so look forward to having all of you, and thank you so much once again. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.